Hello, everyone. Welcome to Toys of Mass Destruction, and this will be our very first episode, and we're very excited to talk about it because today we're talking all about the World Eaters and the very recent international team tournament that I was very, very lucky to participate in. And today I've got with me Joe. Say hi.
Oh yes, so I know, Liam, this is obviously a episode you've been looking forward to a hell of a lot because you are
Oh
basically
yeah.
Mr. World Eater. If there's anything Liam loves more than anything, like phase and running at people, and that is pretty much all World Eaters do. They're not exactly, I mean, they are a finesse army because of that, the way Melee works in 40k, as everyone knows. But in terms of game plan, it's basically run at your opponent and beat them to death.
Yep, that pretty much sums it up really, really well. And I'm so excited to talk about the Codex because a lot of people think of World Eaters, they look at the data sheets and they think, oh, a pretty brain dead army. You're just going to run at the enemy. You're just going to whack them in melee, and that's pretty much all you're going to do. But they have so many shenanigans to them, and so much you can do in the fight phase, and it just makes the army have that extra level of complexity that makes it so much more enjoyable to play for me.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
know you've obviously been playing World Eaters since before they were good, back when they were just a
yeah, yeah,
CSM subfaction that was CSM without getting half the rules, and in return you got an extra attack on the charge, and that's about it.
yeah. Back when we got a bonus attack, but it was only one extra attack, even when we fought twice, just
Yep.
one extra.
Yep. And I know even back then you finished quite highly in the ITC, didn't you? You were like
Yeah,
UK, something
so
like that.
I was very lucky last year, ITC. I believe I was fourth globally with World Eaters and second in the UK, which I was very, very proud of,
Yeah, I mean
naturally.
you should be like.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. So obviously, as you said earlier, last weekend you attended the international team tournament. Obviously, running was it your first tournament outing with the new world? Obviously, you played some like practice games, but I'm guessing it was your first tournament run out.
Yes, so as you said, I played some practice games with the new book, kind of got a feel for them, but this was my first proper tournament where I got to play with the new book and really got to see how they were in a competitive environment. And spoiler alert,
They're
it's
pretty good.
looking pretty good.
They're
It's
pretty
pretty
good.
good, yeah.
Yeah. Turns out when you're like your basic troops get what, like 4 or 5 attacks -3, you do pretty well in melee.
Yeah, they're really, really good.
Yeah.
Really solid army.
So obviously, what we want to do today is obviously we're going to run through the list you took. Then we'll talk a little bit sort of about kind of because there's not many units in the World Eaters Codex. I mean, I think that's one of the things everybody who has had a chance to look at the Codex at this point knows. It is the slimmest Codex there has been in 9th edition, and it's not even by a small margin. It's tiny compared to pretty much every other book. But
Mhm.
I think you've already said the trade-off you get for that is pretty much everything in the book is good. There's
Yes.
nothing in there that you look at it and you go, this is trash. I'll never use it.
Yes. Even like the stratagem page, we only get 8 stratagems available to us, but I think probably 7 of them I would use in every single game.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously the list we're going to be looking at includes most of the good units, not because you've cherry picked, but basically because those are the units you get. There's not a whole lot in the book. So I'm just going to pull up your list now, Liam.
Yep.
Da, da, da. So, first thing I can obviously see straight away, it's pretty troop heavy. I'm guessing that's because obviously we all know Corn Berserkers were pretty good already. And I know when they got their kind of rework, a lot of people sort of thought it was a downgrade because they don't fight twice anymore and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But you're of the opinion that they are even better now than they used to be, and quite substantially so.
Yes. I personally think this is, yeah, as you said, massive upgrade to the Berserker kit. Like, before they were good, like when we got the White Dwarf update, Berserkers got all the benefits, such as they got an extra AP, they got the extra wound, they got more attacks. They did lose the fight twice, but overall their damage output probably increased back when Armor of Contempt was a thing.
Yeah.
But now the Berserker datasheet has changed quite massively since then. In terms of actual stats, like their strength, their toughness, attacks, everything like that, they actually lost an attack. So in that aspect, they got very slightly worse, but the stuff that they got makes up for it. So now they're 4 attacks base, with the sergeant having 5, but the Legion trait kind of makes up for that. You still get your extra attack, and you're also now getting an extra point of strength in the first round of combat. So essentially, you have the Mark of Corn now as your Legion trait.
Yeah, just kind of building.
Yeah, but now the biggest thing is, in my opinion, 2 extra things they get, which is Blood Surge, which is every time the unit is shot at, if a berserker died after the attacking unit finishes all its attacks, you can choose to make a blood surge move, where you roll a d6 and you move that many inches directly towards the closest enemy unit. And you can end in engagement range. It's
So
really,
it
really powerful.
is worth knowing when it comes to blood surge. Obviously, I know you just said directly towards, and that literally means you have to move in a straight line towards the closest unit. So there's no kind of sideways movement shenanigans to get in and out of cover, that kind of thing. It is
No.
literally if you are going to move. So say I roll the dice and roll a 6. You have to move 6. Move like
Yes. Yes. So the only time you wouldn't have to move the full 6 is if the less than that distance would get you into base contact.
fair.
But yeah, as you said, you can't game it. It's not like a consolidate where you can go, oh, I'm going to end up like a fraction of an inch closer to you and move all the way around here to get behind this ruin.
Yeah.
No, you have to go directly towards the closest enemy unit.
And you have to, because I'm just thinking, obviously, if say you get shot at by Tau battle suits and they were 9 inches away, you rolled, I don't know, a 6, but if you only moved 3, you'd be behind a wall. You would have to move the full 6, and basically then
You
have to move yourself out into the open to then be shot. So if you're not careful with it, it can be a bit of a. Do you have to blood surge, or is it a choice of rolling?
It is a choice, I want to say. I will double check now, but I am 90% certain it is a choice.
Yeah. But it's a choice where if you take the choice, you then have to use the full amount, and you have to go towards the closest thing. So it can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, exactly. So I am just looking at it here. Yes, this unit can make a blood surge move.
Yeah,
It does
so
not
it is
have.
a choice.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a very strong rule, and I think you're going to catch a lot of people out, especially. I mean, if you hadn't, I think I remember when you first said to us, "Oh, I can use it to move to engagement range." I was like, "What?"
Yeah. It didn't. I will tell you now, it didn't come up too much in our game. I was up against a lot of armies where it didn't make that much of a difference.
Yeah.
But it's going to be one of those abilities that will really catch people out, especially if you've got a unit of berserkers. You know they're going to die. You know, like you've kind of accepted their fate, that they're not long for this world. And there's a unit near them that is looking forward to charging a unit further back in your lines, but they just happen to be close to the berserkers. Like they're looking at something else to kill. And then if they shoot at those berserkers, but they don't manage to wipe them out, and suddenly they blood surge into that unit that was hoping to charge something else, totally waste them for a turn. Because you knew those berserkers were going to die anyway. But now at least you get to tie them up in combat, you're stopping them from charging anywhere else, and you get to hit first as well.
And I mean it's also kind of the other thing I'm guessing that obviously you're looking at your list, you've got just six 5-man units? Yeah, six
Yes,
5-man units. And as we now know, without armor and contempt, 5-man units of Marines do just kind of evaporate as soon as anything shoots at them. But
yes.
the plus side you've got is if it's, let's imagine like Legionnaires had Blood Surge. If 2 Legionnaires reach a unit, they're probably not doing a whole lot. But if a Corn Berserker Sergeant and an Eviscerator reach a unit, they can still quite happily wipe out half of it, if not more. Like,
yeah, and that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, the Eviscerator. So this wasn't available to Corn Berserkers at all before this book, but it's part of the new kit where 1 in every 5 of the unit can swap their Berserker Chainglaive for a Cornate Eviscerator. It costs 5 points, and I'll tell you now, you are going to do this on every single unit because you would be silly not to. It's essentially a flat upgrade to the weapon. It becomes Strength +3, AP -4, and 2 damage. And there's no -1 to hit. There's no downside. It's literally just a flat upgrade.
so no minus to hit, so you hit on 3s. Obviously, I think it might be a good idea to segue into talking about Blood Tithe, because I know one of the Blood Tithes obviously gives you just army-wide +1 to hit. So at that point, those Eviscerators are all just hitting on 2s, which they're killing pretty much anything they look at that point.
Yeah,
do you want to just run us through kind of people who don't know what the Blood Tithe mechanic is? How does it work?
Yeah, so very quickly, Blood Tithe is the new World Eater's army trait, which you get if every unit in your army has the World Eater's keyword, excluding Agents of Chaos, of course, where everything that dies, friend or foe, you generate a Blood Tithe point. And you get some bonus points if the units that died were vehicles, monsters, characters, or Titanic. And at the end of any phase, you can spend those Blood Tithe points, and they give every World Eaters unit in your army a buff of your choice. And these last for the rest of the game. And they kind of range from the cheaper one, which costs 2 Blood Tithe, gives your entire army a 5-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. And the more expensive ones, like you mentioned, you can get army-wide +1 to hit in close combat, or exploding 6s, or auto wound on 6s.
And how much?
Yeah.
How many blood type? Like we're talking 5, 6, something like that.
So the +1 to hit and the both the +1 to hit and the exploding 6s cost 5 blood tithe points. The auto wound on 6s costs 6 blood tithe, and that's the most expensive one tied with another one, which is all about anger.
Right. So obviously we'll come on to anger in a minute. But obviously when we look at your list in a second, I think everyone will sort of see that quite a lot of your list does play into the whole blood tithe mechanic, especially when it comes to secondaries later. So we've looked at obviously the Corn Berserkers, we've looked at the massive glow up they've had when you compare them with those 2 extra rules. So if we then look at the Lord Invocatus, one of the shiny new models, and I know one that you loved and you did your little conversion before.
Yes.
Obviously worth noting, as we said in the World Eaters book, you've only got 8 stratagems. You only have 1 Warlord trait, which kind of then pegs you into you either have Angron or you run the Lord Invocatus. I'm assuming part of the reason you didn't run Angron at the time was because you didn't have time to get him built, painted, ready. But do you want to run us through what the Lord Invocatus does for the list and why he is easily, I would say, one of the best units in the World Eaters army?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. He is one of the best. And so what he gives the army is he's a cavalry hero, and he acts very similar to the generic Chaos Lord on Juggernaut in that he increases the speed of your army. He has a 6-inch aura of all core units get +2 inches of movement, which your army is all about moving up the board and getting stuck in combat. So absolute auto take. You'd be silly not to take at least either him or a generic Chaos Lord on Juggernaut. He's a little bit better in combat as well. Obviously, you can't kit him out of a relic or a warlord trait that will make him better in combat, but instead he has an extra point of AP at AP -3, and he also ignores invuns. So he's really good at running in, maybe soloing a character that's kind of not expecting to be killed at that point.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, he also has fly, which is actually so incredibly useful.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. The dude is described as riding the skies, which have caught aflame whenever he rides to battle. And yeah, it's really,
yeah.
really cool.
I'm just thinking, obviously, on a lot of the boards we play on nowadays, obviously, all using the sort of standard UK tournament terrain. You're not going to get very far if you're just a cavalry model because you've got a lot of small, medium L blockers to get around, even like the little pieces of dense get in the way. Obviously, having that fly is kind of massive, and I'm assuming it probably came up quite a lot in your games.
Oh yeah, it meant he could kind of hide in that medium L shaped blocker, and he could just jump over, get to where he needs to be. And he's got a 12-inch move, so like he gets places.
He's a speedy boy.
Speaking of speed,
yeah, go on.
Speaking of speed, we got his warlord trait. So this is the reason you take Lord Invocatus, and is the reason why I did not take Angron in this list. Because this is the first time in a book where the named characters have their own unique warlord traits. They're not just like, I think off the top of my head, like before the Ultramarines supplement came out, Marnius Calgar would just have the Ultramarines warlord trait.
Yeah.
That any character could take. Like any Ultramarines character could still take it. But in this book, Lord Invocatus has a warlord trait, and you only get that warlord trait if you take Lord Invocatus. So his warlord trait is, I believe it's called the Road of 8 Bloody Steps. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's up there on the screen. Road of the 8 Bloody Steps.
Yes. So this warlord trait essentially means at the start of the first battle round, but before the first turn begins, you pick yourself, Lord Invocatus, and 2 other core units that are within 9 inches of him, and you just make a normal move. So it's worth noting that is all the wording it says. So the fact that you make a normal move means if you're within 6 inches of him, you get +2 to your move, so you're moving that a little bit extra further. It means units like Berserkers are moving 8 inches, or 8-bound are moving 11 inches. But the more important part, which is really going to catch people out, is you do not have to end more than 9 inches away from enemy units, which is crazy.
It's massive.
Absolutely
Things like
crazy.
Space Marine Infiltrators, Incursors, stuff like that. Anything for deploying, a lot of the rules like that, you have to still stay outside of those, so that you can still kind of be screened out. But don't get me wrong, they can still kind of screen you out a little bit. But you've got, I mean, as you said, with 8-bound, you're then looking at like an 11-inch move, so you've got 22-inch move if you include your first turn move. You're just going to, anything that people put out to screen, you're just going to move around it.
Yeah.
And like, unless they literally have enough like models and reach to pretty much screen from one side of the board to the other, you will just move around it.
Yeah, exactly. And even if worst comes to worst, let's say you really need something dead in the first turn, Lord Invocatus has fly. You can
Yeah,
just fly over those screens if you really want to dedicate him to
yeah,
something. I wouldn't
yeah,
recommend it most games, but it's an option. It's available
yeah.
to you.
No, no, for sure. So obviously we've talked about Lord of the Cars, talked about the sort of buffs he hands out. Because it's worth noting actually, your list has no reroll, does it? It's just
Nope, no
it's,
rerolls.
it's literally just raw number of attacks, raw killing power that's actually doing most of the work. There's no rerolls of any kind, even from Blood Tithe.
Nope. So there are no blood type that give rerolls. They obviously there's exploding sixes, so it benefits you from your dice rolls. But in terms of actual rerolls, the list doesn't really have any. It is something I've considered, maybe taking a Demon Prince for real ones to hit. Khan the Betrayer now gives real ones to wound in an aura, like a lieutenant.
Yeah,
But I feel like these units are just a little bit too pricey when you compare them to stuff like 8-bound or Berserkers.
yeah,
Having that core keyword and the stratagems it gives those units are just too good to pass up. Like, you could take a Demon Prince, which means your Berserkers are now hitting on twos, re-rolling ones. They'll hit all their attacks. Or you can take a whole other unit of Berserkers, which is a whole other unit that you can fight on death with.
yeah. Who's so killing anyway that realistically the extra, the sort of the bonus you're getting from reroll ones probably isn't worth the killing power you're losing from just taking Berserkers
Exactly.
or taking like half a unit of 8-bound, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about 8-bound because they're obviously one of the new World Eaters units. They're basically possessed on steroids, and they
Yes.
come in the two different flavors, which obviously you've got in your list. You've got the 8-bound, which are just more generic, like sort of max 6-man units.
Yes. So they're minimum 3, max 6.
Yep, and then the exalted 8-bound, which are even beefier versions, and they are literally just units of 3, right?
Yeah. You have to take
Yeah.
minus 3, no more, no less.
Yep. And obviously, again, all core, same as the Corn Berserkers.
So the normal 8-bounder core, but the
Yep.
exalted 8-bounder not.
You can't do the pre-game move with the exalted 8-bound, but then again, I doubt
No,
that's too much of an issue. I'm guessing that's why you've got the 2 units of 8-bound, so they can just pre-game move pretty much every game.
exactly.
With their 22-inch move. Do you want to just run us through kind of their stat block?
Yeah. So essentially, when it comes to 8-bound, imagine a possessed. In terms of raw stats, they're very, very similar. Um, I believe they get the same amount of attacks. 8-bound get 4 attacks base.
Yeah,
The 8-bound champion gets 5. They have a 9-inch move. The main difference is their strength 6 instead of strength 5, which you'd expect for being a World Eaters possessed
yeah,
model. Their weapons, however, are a hell of a lot better than normal possessed weapons. So they're normal 8-bound. They take, I believe they're called 8-bound eviscerators.
yeah. Sounds about right. Yeah,
Yes, so these are, I want to say, their strength user, so strength 6 or strength 7 in the first round of combat, minus 3 and 2 damage. And they have the chainsword like ability where whenever you fight, you make an additional attack with this weapon.
yeah.
And they have 2 eviscerators each, so they actually make 2 extra attacks with their weapons. So
Does that mean
they
each
go,
one, each one goes from 4 attacks base to 7 on the charge?
yes, 7 attacks each.
That's kind of nuts. So that means from your 5-man unit, you're making 46 attacks, including the sergeant.
Kind of. So, yeah, so the 4 men will make 28 attacks,
Yeah,
and then the sergeant
yeah.
would make 12.
My math is massively off then, but yeah.
Yeah. So there's also the sergeant, which I'm noticing an error. I did not take lacerators on these guys. That's my bad. Instead, I took the heavy chain glaive, but I'll talk about both of them anyway. So the lacerators, which I'm probably going to lean towards now anyway. I do think that they're the better option now. These are, you don't get any extra attacks for taking this weapon. So you would get 6 attacks with them in the first round of combat because they're on the champion. They are strength +1, AP -3, and flat 3 damage. So strength 8,
Yeah,
is pretty good.
they're a Terminator killer, basically.
Exactly, yeah. The other option you can give is the heavy chain glaive, which is same +1 strength, AP -3, but instead of flat 3 damage, it's just the 1 damage, but you make double the number of attacks like a sweep.
Okay.
It was really good over the weekend. Like, it did do a lot of work, especially when you can increase their damage, which we'll talk about in a second when it comes up in the games. But after seeing lacerators in action in other games, it really made me realize how good they are
Yeah.
in the fact that they don't need any buffs, like just flat. They're just thunderhammers that are -3, like with no -1 to hit or anything like that.
Can you get an extra AP through a blood tithe?
Yes, you can.
So you can obviously basically all of this can be turned from -3 to -4.
Yep.
Which in a world where armor it doesn't exist, Marines are big. You are literally just running through any kind of power armor.
Yep. With +1 to hit as well, so it can hit on 2s.
Does
Exploding
if you
6s.
do take that blood tithe, does it affect characters as well, or is it just core?
What, the extra AP?
Yeah.
Blood Tithe affects everything.
That means even
So
the Lord of the Carts is running around with -4, ignoring advance.
it works on rhinos as well. You can have rhinos hitting on 5s with AP -1 if you really want to.
Oh.
But yes, it does work on Lord Invocatus, makes him AP4, etc., etc.
So see, that's 8-bound. They seem amazing to me for 200 points. Yeah, I see why you'd run 2 units of 5, obviously just combo with the Lord of Cars. And then I know obviously you've gone for your third slot, which are exalted 8-bound. Now these guys are more beefy. They've got chain fists, right? So they're even
Yes.
killier. I have no idea how you can really be even more killier than that, but
they're different, I would say. Like they're much more suited into a different target. So normal 8-bound, they're faster, they get more attacks per model as well, which is important. It means they're slightly better against hordes. But the exalted 8-bound, so they're not core, as I mentioned before. So they're 9-inch move, that's it. You're not increasing that in any way. They're slightly more expensive, they're 5 points more per model. But the upgrades you get are weapon skill 2 up, so you don't need a +1 to hit or anything. You're already hitting on 2s. You have a 4 up invuln instead of a 5 up, so little piddly shots are actually less likely to do damage. The odd melter might just bounce straight off them.
yep.
And the chain fist as well is worth talking about. So they each do have an eviscerator, so they get to make an extra attack with that. Strength 7, -3. But the chain fist is strength +3, so strength 10 when you charge, AP -4, and 2 damage. The sergeant has the option to take a pair of these chain fists, where instead they become flat 3 damage.
Okay. Is that a points upgrade or is that free?
No, it's free.
So you probably, realistically, you probably trade 1 extra attack with the Eviscerator for flat 3 damage on all your other attacks, pretty much all.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know you can do the +1 damage on normal 8-bound. Can you do +1 damage on exalted to make their weapons flat 4
Yes.
damage?
Yes, you can.
Blech.
Yeah, it's real good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see why you take that. The other thing, probably to bear in mind, is they have a rule or something where, like, if they're in strategic reserve, they can come on a turn earlier.
So that's something I actually forgot to mention about the normal 8-bound. The normal 8-bound have that ability where if they're in strategic reserve, they can arrive as if it was 1 turn earlier, regardless of any mission rules.
Yeah.
It is useful. I feel that if you don't have the pre-game move, you will actually make quite a lot of use of that.
Yeah.
But if you have the pre-game move,
they're on the board
they're probably
game.
going to start on the board. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I feel like maybe if you were running Angron instead of running the Lord Invocatus, you might take a third unit of normal 8-bound and put them in reserve instead.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a use for it, just to catch people on an angle that they're unaware of. They might not be expecting, or they're just focusing so much on the red horde that's in front of them, and that they just forget about their flanks.
Yeah, I mean, even if you do manage to pull off that kind of turn 1 charge, especially if you do it before your opponent's actually had a turn, having done the same as Night Lords, obviously, with the From Darkness We Come, sort of deep striking in turn 1, you can just win a game turn 1 if your opponent just then has to spend their first turn just clearing their own deployment zone, especially when the rest of your army is obviously as clear as it is. Then turn 2, you hit them with everything else, then it's pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really strong.
Yeah.
But the ability that Exalted 8-bound have, they have a different ability, nothing to do with arriving from reserve early or anything like that. So they have a 6-inch aura, which actually covers a lot of the board when you consider their 3 models. So while an enemy unit is within 6 inches of them, if they either attempt to make a fallback move or they attempt to start an action, you roll a dice, and on a 4 up, they either cannot fall back or they cannot do that action.
That's the no fallback one. The no action one's probably going to come up quite a lot, but I think especially as you're so melee focused, it's going to be that no fallback that's just.
Exactly, yeah. I can imagine the no actions. It's going to be useful against Tau, stopping their Mark lights. trying to think where else it might be useful. Hey,
Yeah, so
against
I'm just
Al.
thinking with
Oh,
obviously with the no actions one, a lot of the time if something's within 6 inches of you anyway, it's probably doesn't really want to be there because it's within 6 inches of you. And as we'll talk about later, I'm assuming with your strats you can do a 6 inch heroic. So that's not really
yes.
where someone wants to be at the best of times anyway.
Yeah. Well, it is worth noting the Exalted 8 bound can't do the heroic. They're not core, but I feel like they're definitely worth it purely for the no fallback. They're also a 3-man unit is cheap enough that it can kind of just run around on its own.
Yeah.
And people are not likely to dedicate anything to it when they've got 10 normal 8 bound right in their face.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, these guys are obviously still getting the bonuses from the Blood Tithe. So once you get a couple of those kind of big buffs stacked up on them, I know they're already hitting on twos, they're already like -4.
Mm.
But as soon as you start getting like flat 4 damage, to just run 3 guys into a vehicle, they're probably just one shot it pretty
Yeah.
effortlessly.
I mean, I've seen an Eviscerator Sergeant, an Exalted 8 bound Sergeant alone, no buffs or anything, just runs into an Armager and just kills it.
Yep.
Just on its own.
Yeah,
Like,
that doesn't surprise me.
yeah, like 6 attacks at that flat 3 damage at strength 10,
Yeah,
hitting on 2s. Yeah, just rips apart vehicles, just the
yeah.
Sergeant alone.
Yeah, so obviously talking about Blood Tithe, the next thing you've obviously got is 3 Chaos Spawn. Now, Chaos Spawn are pretty good in pretty much every Chaos list because they're cheap, they move relatively fast, and they're a single model that can hide relatively easily. But obviously for you, when it's the whole Blood Tithe thing, it's your opponent's units and your units dying to give you Blood Tithe. Having those 3 Chaos Spawn, it's just 3 Blood Tithe, 3 free Blood Tithe points.
Yep, exactly. Like, you literally just run them onto objectives, spread your arms wide, and just go, please kill me. Please, for Khorne. He cares not.
Yeah. So then obviously final sort of bits at the bottom of your list, you've got a couple of Chaos Rhinos. Do you still get free war gear on those, or do you have to pay for that combi
We
flamer?
have to pay for those, and you do know I've got the combi flamers. So I had 20 points spare. Like,
Yeah.
we don't get them for free yet. I'm not sure we will, but yeah, I had the extra points, and
Yeah.
so I just chucked some flamers onto them.
Fair. And then finally, I know this is one of the things that we discussed quite at length when you were kind of making this list. You've got a couple of War Dog Brigands, and that is literally just because, bar the Rhino's Flamer, that is the only real shooting in your list, right? Like,
Yeah, I've got bolt pistols, but that's it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just for the ability to sort of reach out and kill a Rhino and then charge what falls out.
Yes. So they did a lot of work on the weekend, and I'm going to start and say off. I apologize to all World Eaters players out there. I'm not a true World Eaters player because I do have a Zinch unit in this army.
How dare you?
It's one of the war
May
dogs. I'm
have been
sorry.
my personal suggestion, but how dare you?
Zinch has infiltrated my army. He's placed a spy, and yeah, but I hate to say it, it came in so clutch.
It's just free. Mirror Fates is free CP, right? Well, not free, but
Yes.
rerolling CP.
So it's every time your opponent spends a CP on a stratagem on a 5-up, you get a command point.
Yeah.
Which World Eaters already start on a lot of CP, like because we don't have any pre-game to spend on. So you're always going to start on 5 or 4 CP. But I tell you, nothing can go wrong with more CP. At one point, I had 8 CP in my pool, and I was just chilling.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even need that much, but it's nice when you get those matchups and you really need to pump out as much CP as possible.
Where you need that big one-turn swing where, like, back in sort of the old days of like 8, where you'd go, right, I'm going to spend 7 CP this turn because it will probably win me the game. Having the option to actually do that again is nice.
Exactly. Like, you can do that. You can run your army out, spend all the command points, do all this stuff, and then it goes to the opponent's turn. You're like, hey, I've still got CP to interrupt and fight on death. This is great. I love it.
Yeah. So that's kind of your list. The units you took, kind of what options you have basically as a World Eaters player. Because I think bar Jackals, you've got every unique World Eaters unit. I think. Obviously,
Yeah.
Angron, but
as of this point, yeah, Angron is halfway assembled and painted, but pretty much everything I have at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, if we then move on from talking about obviously the units themselves, if we talk about the secondaries that are available to you, I think that's another amazing thing about World Eaters. Your secondaries are basically do what you were planning to already do and just kill them.
Yeah.
Um,
The World Eater secondaries are incredibly strong. I'll tell you that now.
And I'm pretty sure you've said this already, but did you pretty much take World Eater secondaries for almost every game?
Almost every game, yeah. For 3 of them, I took all 3 World Eater secondaries, which I'll tell you about now. I'll tell you exactly what they do. So the first one is Blood for the Blood God, and this is exactly what you expect it to be. you get a point for everything you kill in melee. Has to be from a World Eater's unit for
Yep.
purposes
You don't,
of
so
ally.
you don't get it from brigands, but they're shooting brigands, not melee brigands.
Exactly, yeah. So you get a point for everything you kill in combat. All of the points added up at the end of the battle round. You don't score them immediately, which is important for the next part. You also get an extra point if any of those units killed were like vehicles and monsters. So if you kill like 2 rhinos in combat, you get 4 points. But it is worth noting you score at the end of the battle round, because if you fell back at all with any World Eaters unit, you score no points for that battle round. And it's important to note that it's World Eaters. So if you've allied in brigands, they can still fall back and you'll still score all the points you need for that battle round.
That's really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, obviously, as well, you've got you want to be in melee, but the main reason you normally sort of fall back is if you're not confident you're going to win a fight. You just fight on death. So what do you care?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like World Eaters should win most melee fights that they're engaged in.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like if a World Eaters unit is in a second round of combat, you're probably fighting something outrageously hard to kill anyway, like 10 Dark Angels Terminators or something. But most of the time, the turn you hit it, because you either fight on death or fight first, you probably kill whatever you've charged.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah. Go on to secondary.
Yeah, so the next one we have is called the Blood God's Due, and this is personally my favorite of the new 3 secondaries that we got. So it's scored at the end of every player turn, and it works by you tally up how many objectives in that player turn were soaked in blood. And an objective is soaked in blood when a non-vehicle unit dies on it. And it has to have started its turn on the objective for this to work. And you score 1 point for every objective that was soaked in blood. That works for your own units dying on the points. It works for your opponent's units dying on the points. As long as they started the turn on it, you're soaking those objectives in blood. You're getting so many points.
Yeah, this is really good. I know, obviously, we played that game where you had the old book with the new secondaries. I was playing Grey Knights, and it's just the first couple of times you play against it, it's such a massive. You have to think about it differently, because there was a couple of times where I would move units onto objectives, not to take the objective, but just on the off chance that you would then misplay, or I would accidentally, well, not accidentally, but I would overkill something and then be able to kind of also clear that objective. But by doing that, all I'm doing is giving you points, because then you're going to kill them in your turn. And I think there was a few times where I probably gave you 3 or 4 points on it, just because I moved things onto the objectives on an off chance I might be able to take it. But really, there's no point in doing that against World Eaters. And I think that's a big thing you have to wrap your head around when you're playing against them. Only move on to an objective if you're absolutely sure it's going to get you points, because if it's not, it's going to get them points.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're a vehicle. Like, you chuck a transport on there, even if it dies, it's not soaking the objective in blood. So, but it's a really good secondary. It means it's literally rewarding you for losing your army, which is so incredibly strong.
Like, I mean, it's rewarding you for doing what you want to be doing, what the game wants you to do anyway, which is fight and trade over objectives. So you're just getting bonus points for basically playing the primary.
Yeah. And then
third one.
Yeah, so we got our last secondary, which is Pile the Skulls. This one is dumb. It should not exist as it is, because if you ever see a game with World Eaters and they don't score 15 on this, I don't know what they're doing, man. They're doing something wrong. So at the end of each battle round, you can choose to discard up to 1, 2, or 3 Blood Tithe points. And for each Blood Tithe point you discard, you score 2 points to a maximum of 5 per battle round. It's dumb.
So it's just, I'm just thinking, obviously, let's imagine we were on a table that was Planet Bowling Ball. There's literally no terrain, and I'm playing Tau. Turn 1, I shoot and kill your entire army. You've got, I don't know, like 15 units or something like that. So you would then get 15 Blood Tithe points. All right, you've been tabled, so you can't do anything else. Guess you'll just spend those 15, spend 3 a turn, and get you 15 points.
Yep. And it's not even 15 Blood Tithe. You need 9 Blood Tithe to max the secondary, which
outrageous.
Because each point scores you 2.
So I suppose I'm also just sort of looking at your list, thinking about it. So you go first with your 3 Chaos Spawn. Let's imagine you've got a mission like, I don't know, Tide of Conviction. You run the 3 Chaos Spawn onto your 2 objectives near your deployment. You just sit there and go, kill me. Cool, that's 3 points on the objective. I can't remember the names of it, but that's 3 points on the objective one. That's 3 Blood Tithe. Cool, you're now a third of a way to 15 points on one of your secondaries, because somebody killed 3 Chaos Spawn.
And let's say
That
I
would
move
make
my
sense.
rhinos up. One of those rhinos gets destroyed. It's
Yep.
worth 2 blood tithe because it's a vehicle. Let's say in my turn, one of my war dogs with their melters managed to pop one of the enemy transports. That's another 2 blood tithe. Their
Yep.
Gatling managed to kill some cultist screen unit. That's another blood tithe.
Yeah,
It's
seems outrageous. Like, let's see how you'd ever not get 15.
if there was no cap on it, like at the end of battle round, you could just spend as many as you could to get 15. You
Yeah.
would get 15 at the end of battle round too in
Yeah.
most games.
Yeah. I could definitely see it.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing basically, your secondaries are pretty good. You definitely rate them as sort of the upper end of competitive.
I think out of all the army secondaries, I think World Eaters have the best in the game.
Yeah. I think obviously when we played that game, I was playing Grey Knights, and I think we kind of agreed. We were playing a game where your Blood Tithe one didn't even work yet. We agreed
Yeah.
that they are definitely some of the best, and I think we kind of went as far as to say that Blood Tithe one is the best secondary
Yes.
because it's almost impossible not to score 15.
Yes. Like so the other best secondary game for a comparison, probably Codex Warfare right now,
Yeah.
which is we know it's an auto 15. Like all you have to do is kill like 7 units,
Yeah.
which
Kill
is
7
not very
units.
hard at
Kill
all.
7 units with heavy weapons, and you get 14, and
Yeah,
then kill an extra something with a bolt rifle. Cool, you get 15.
exactly. But what if I told you there was a secondary where you could be table turn 1 and still get 15? Like it is
Yeah.
impossible to not get 15 on this secondary. The only time you won't is if you misplay. You accidentally spend too much blood tithe on a buff that you felt like you really needed,
Yeah.
and you didn't realize that you didn't leave yourself enough to score those points.
Yeah. Even then, like, I'm just thinking, obviously, if you're getting extra points for killing vehicles and stuff like that, it seems like you're getting so much blood tithe. You're going to have like, once you do your +1 a hit, you do your extra AP, which I'm guessing is kind of the ones you're going to take in a lot of games.
Mhm.
You're just going to have so much blood tithe left over anyway that you're still going to have enough to spend on this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So if that kind of covers everything about your list, I think what's important to reference for people who don't know and have never been to one, myself included, because I've never actually been to one, is the tournament you went to was a team tournament. So
Yes.
the kind of the way the whole thing works in regards with team matchups and pairings is very different to the way it would work in a normal tournament.
Mhm.
Do you want to just kind of run us through, kind of give us a brief overview of how it works so we can understand?
Yeah, so this was my first ever team tournament as well. Like I was like fish out of water kind of thing. I'd never seen how it works, but it was very easy to get into. Like after the first round, I was immediately into it. I immediately understood everything. So if you're like a newcomer and you're kind of like unsure of how the pairing systems work, if it's a bit overwhelming for you, trust me, it's not. It's very straightforward and it's really easy to get into. So how it works is you're paired up against another team, and each team has a captain, and they will put down simultaneously, so revealed at the same time, their first defender, which is any list that probably they feel comfortable is good against any other kind of army. The opposing team will then, again, simultaneously, both teams do this at the same time, put down 2 attackers, and these are the 2 lists that they want to face the opponent's defender. So let's say our team puts down, I'm trying to think of an example, say Space Marines. Space Marines just jack of all trades army, and the other team thinks, oh, our 2 attacker armies might be really good against this army, so we'll put those 2 down. The defending army then picks one of those 2 attackers to face against their army, and then those 2 armies get paired up. Sounds confusing, but when you start
I kind of get it. Yeah.
when you start doing it, it's very straightforward, and you simply repeat the process until everyone has a game, and it takes like 5-10 minutes tops.
Yeah. So cause what I'm kind of hearing though is if you are a defender army, you want to be a kind of take all comers. Your list can do pretty well into most things. I think you kind of accept you're never going to have an easy matchup, but you are always going to have a choice of at least 2 matchups.
Yes, so typically when we played, our first defenders were either Dark Angels or Custodes, because
Yeah.
they're just armies that can kind of like look at most matchups and feel pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, they can go. I might not win this game, but I'm gonna score 50, 60 points, something like that, like pretty
Yeah,
confidently.
exactly.
So were you ever put forward as a defender, or were you always an attacker?
I was typically put forward as the attacker most of the
Yeah.
time. I think there was one time in round 2 where I was actually put forward as a defender.
Yeah.
And it did actually work out very well for us.
Yeah,
But
because I'm obviously just sort of your list is just hyper pressure. So being able to see an opponent's list and have a 50-50 shot that you are the one they will play. If you just know they can't deal with that much pressure, yeah, you probably just roll over them.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, cool. So that kind of covers for us sort of what World Leaders place is maybe in a team tournament, and also just sort of how the team tournament works. Um, sorry, was teams five people in a team, 6 people?
Yeah, so 5 people in a team. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also worth noting that when you do get paired up with your respective player who you'll be playing against, the scoring works slightly differently than it would in a normal singles tournament. So in a singles tournament, you play a game against your opponent. Let's say it was a really close game. One person scores 95 and the other person scores 93. So there's only 2 points in it. The player who scored 95 would win the game, get the win, and then move up higher in the bracket. In a team tournament, this is different. It's all done by victory point differential. So if 2 players finish a game, but there's only 2 or 3 points in it, it's actually classed as a tie. And
Okay.
each player is awarded 10 points. And then if one player does win, they will get more points depending on how many more victory points they got than their opponent. So you could have, say, a 30 victory point differential, and that scores like 16 points to the winner and 4 points to the loser. Or you could have a game where it was an absolute whitewash. One player scores 100, the other player scores like 30, and then it's a 20 point to the victor, 0 point to the loser.
So yeah, so obviously as we were saying with defenders, having a list where you can still confidently score 60 points is still good because you could still lose your game and still score your teams 8 points, 6 points, whatever.
Exactly. It was really new to me because it really drilled in the impression that every point matters.
Yeah.
Like, even if, as you said, you're going to lose, you're up against a horrible matchup and you're just like, oh, what's the point? But
Yeah.
there absolutely is a point. If you just keep playing and maybe turn your loss from being a 0 point loss to still scoring 3 points for your team, that could mean the difference between your team winning the round or losing the round.
And then is it at the end, obviously, from your 5 matchups, you just add all the points together and whichever team has
Yes.
more wins?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's done by because it's done by differential. You could have 3 members of your team lose, but because the 2 people that won by such a large margin, you can still win the round.
Yeah. And is your then sort of next round's pairing then based on that score you got?
Yes, it's
As a
done by how
combined
many
team.
points you got.
Okay, cool. So the ITT that you went to, the international team tournament, is a five rounds.
Yeah, 5 rounds. Yeah.
Yep, and you did pretty well, didn't you? I think you placed like 16th, 17th out of 65.
Yes. So
Something like that.
there were 62 teams, I believe, and we placed 17th, I believe, which was placing I was more than happy with.
Pretty good.
Like,
So as a team, how many rounds did you win for?
so I won 3 games.
Yep.
I lost 1 game, and then one of my games was a draw. Due to the victory point differential, it was classed as a draw.
Yeah. And sorry, as a team, like obviously that pooling at the end of a round, did your team win 4 rounds or did they win?
Our team won 3. We won 3 and lost 2. Yeah.
Cool. So what I think is probably best, we run through obviously the 3 games you won. If we just we won't gloss over them, but I'm more interested to hear about the game you lost because there's obviously a reason why you probably lost it. And I know you played World Leaguers for a hell of a long time. So to me, you didn't just make some silly mistake. There would have been a reason why you lost that game. So the 3 games you did win though were Eldari, and that was actual Eldari, not Yanari.
Yes, so it was Eldari. They had a small Harlequins patrol allied in with 2 units of troops, the Star Weaver, and the super fast troop master who advances D3+3.
Which moves a million bloody inches.
Exactly, yeah, something you really need to watch out for.
Yeah.
But then he also had Big Bike Blob. He had a small unit of Swooping Hawks, Baharoth, 30 Dire Avengers as well, which is
Pretty
something
good.
I haven't seen in a long time. Yeah. And that formed the bulk of his list. It was very shooty, hardly any combat outside of like Baharoth and the Harlequins.
Has no melee and it's all very fragile. So I'm guessing even when you run 2 Corn Berserkers into something and they probably just wipe the squad, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this game, it was actually quite close, and it really highlighted one of the weaknesses that World Eaters have. So, first of all, I totally underestimated his shooting, and I lost both of the armigers in a single turn, which was something I did not expect at all.
Yeah.
He was playing Hail of Doom, so, 6s to hit auto wound and count as a 6 with all the shuriken. But I underestimated Guide and Doom, which I should never do, obviously.
You've played against it enough at this point, Liam. It's not like it's a
Yeah,
new rule. It's been out for
exactly.
years.
It's not. It's not. I just had a brain fart, and when my two armigers died in front of me, it really kicked in that I need to be a lot more careful with them. And Baharoth came down into my lines for behind enemy lines. He didn't charge anything. He didn't need to. Just score points. And it was at that point where I realized that after the War Dogs died, I could not deal with him. There was absolutely nothing I could do to stop him doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
All he did was sit in my deployment zone all game. I knew that if I charged a unit into him, I would at minimum lose 2 units trying to kill them, which I just couldn't really afford to do with how fast the rest of his army was. I really needed to keep everything else checked in, and it ended up being a really close game. Really close.
Obviously, you managed to win it in the end. So
Yes.
was that one of the rounds your team won?
Yes, the first round we won. As I said, my game was close, so I only scored 12 points, and my opponent still scored 8. He put in really good effort to score those points.
Definitely shows that if you can still keep it a close game, even if you do lose, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it can almost not matter.
Exactly.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say those 2 points that I only scored like 2 points more than I would for a draw.
Yeah.
And so if his other team members did really well and got 20-0, that's massive. It really propels them up in the rankings.
Yeah. And obviously your second game was against Sisters, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so I went up against Bloody Rose Sisters. So it was the typical 2 units of Retributors and a Castigator were the only sort of shooting he had. The rest of it was Zephyrim, Repentia, Morvenval, all the Sisters good stuff, basically.
Yeah.
This game was brutal. Really brutal. So we were playing on Data Scry Salvage, which is already my favorite mission. I love this mission.
Liam's favorite mission at the best of times.
I love it. I know the mission inside out, and it's just my absolute favorite mission to play. I also got first turn, and I really made use of that pre-game move that I have access to, thanks to Lord Invocatus. And I managed to kill both his units of Retributors with that pre-game move charge. So his list had pretty much no shooting left.
Yeah.
All he really had was the Castigator, which is good. It's cheap, but it's not quite going to wipe like a whole berserk.
It's not Retributors backed up with like Morvenval. It's just there to be annoying and consistent shooting, not unit deleting shooting.
Exactly. And so when the rest of his army is infantry melee units that are all toughness 3 with not that great a save, and I have access to fight on death, and at worst my output is strength 6 and -2, so I'm winning on 2s. It's rough. It's really rough.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems World Eaters are pretty much the ultimate melee bully army, where in a weird way you want to be paired into other melee armies, where you're just easy access to fight on death. You're just trading up like all the time.
Yeah. So especially with how cheap it is. So I'll talk about how the fight on death strat works in that it's exactly what you expect. It's 1 CP or 2 CP for any core unit in your army can fight on death. 1 CP if it's a troop unit, so core berserkers, or 2 CP if it's not troops, so 8 pound. And essentially every time he would charge one of my units on an objective with Zephyrim that had full rerolls, so I absolutely lose the squad, like no contest. I would then fight on death, and then he not only would he lose that unit that he's just sent forwards, I would still have the objective because it was sticky objective, so my berserkers are OBSEC.
Yeah.
It would also drown the objective in blood because my berserkers started the turn on it.
Yep. And it's getting you blood tithe.
It's getting me 2 blood tithe because I'm losing one of my own and he's losing one of his.
It's just nuts. It's rewarding you for just playing the game you were going to play anyway.
Yep. And let's not forget, my last secondary is also kill units in melee, which I'm scoring when I fight on death.
So if he charges unit as Zephyrim onto an objective, you kill the Zephyrim and he kills you. You score 2 points from soaking it in blood and 2 points, or no, 1 point for killing things in melee. You score 3 points in a trade that would normally go his way.
Yeah. So that's exactly the thing. Like even if my secondaries weren't a thing, I would still do that because it just makes sense. But it's the fact that not only am I spending a CP to kill one of his units, I am spending a CP to kill one of his units and score on my secondaries in doing so.
Yeah.
I'm just literally doing what I already wanted to be doing anyway, and I'm scoring points for it.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. So I can definitely see, and that was, I think you said that was pretty much your biggest blowout game of the weekend, right? Like,
yeah, that was my only 20-0 game.
yeah. And sorry, for a 20-0, how wide does the point differential have to be?
50 points.
Yeah, so it's, again, that is really not easy to do. Yeah, sounds like it was a brutal game.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy, great opponent. Like it was such a fun game to play against him, but unfortunately,
It's a bad matchup for him.
Really rough matchup for him.
Yeah. Third game was Drakari.
Yeah, so this was a tough game. It was against Drakari, against very, very experienced player, and this was a matchup I was looking at, and I was a bit worried. He had a lot of transports, a lot of small units that he could just run around, and it kind of felt like I really needed a way to pop those transports, or I would just be dead in the water.
Yeah. Is this obviously this is kind of why you took the Brigands? Did the Brigands come in big here, popping Raiders and Venoms and stuff?
So they weren't really popping the transports that much, and funnily enough, the melters weren't doing that great. But the Gatling was actually amazing.
Yeah.
Like there were times where one of my war dogs would get just the tiniest view on some Cabalites over in the corner, and then the Gatling looks at them, just picks up a whole.
Yeah, I mean it's strength 6, right? So it's winning on 2s.
Yeah, 12 shots at strength 6 -2. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, any like Drakari infantry that aren't racks, it's just picking them up pretty much.
Yeah. And yeah, so the mission as well was conversion. So if your warlord's alive, you get your CP. Otherwise, you only get on a 4-up. And this was a game where I did start to realize how strong World Eaters are into another melee army. Obviously, I just played Sisters, so I'd kind of seen it already. But he was running a lot of Incubi, 3 units of 5, I think. And he was really hoping to force me to fight last. But unfortunately, my leadership at lowest is 9, so it's not very likely to happen. And
I mean, he probably then he gets 1 off, and then you just fight on death anyway, right? Like,
yeah. So throughout the game, he was unlucky and he didn't get any. He did fail every single one. But he needs to roll a 10 on 2d6.
Yeah,
it's quite tricky. Yeah. So it was just stuff like he would charge 2 units in. None of it was fighting last, and he would fight with 1 unit, and I'd go, cool, those berserkers will now fight on death for 1 CP, and when that fight finishes, I'm going to spend 2 CP and interrupt over there.
Yeah. So I suppose they're almost 3 CP a turn, but as you said, you're not spending a whole lot of CP, and there's each Mirror of Fates giving you extra CP.
Yeah.
You're going to have that 3 CP combo most turns, I would guess.
Yes. I had it pretty much every time I needed it.
Yeah. And I definitely say that is, I know you've talked about it a whole bunch with us, it's definitely one of the biggest sort of, it's a really simple combo, but being able to charge 2 units, fight first with 1, fight on death with the other, and then interrupt, like,
yeah,
you laugh at basically.
It essentially meant when he charged 2 of his units into mine, I was losing 1 unit and he was losing 2.
Yeah.
So in his own turn, he was trading down.
Yeah.
And that's not even including what I was about to do in my turn.
No. Yeah, I can see how it's just kind of, and obviously then also going back to secondaries again, you're scoring points from doing that, you're scoring points in your opponent's turn, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of people can do nowadays, but you're reliably scoring points in your opponent's turn just for stopping them doing what they were trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, it was a really tough game. Like I really had to work for it. He played excellently as well. Like he knew exactly where to position his stuff.
This is one of the other games you won?
Yes. So this was another 12-8 win. I believe the final score was 85-73, something like that. Yeah, the World Eater secondaries and the ability to fight on death really swung it into my favor.
Yeah, it does just carry you through. So then that took you on to round 4. Obviously, I'm assuming the tournament was 3 games day 1, 2 games day 2.
Yeah, so we're going into day 2 now.
Yeah, so you're going into day 2. Was this a local? I can't remember. Was this a local one? Did you travel for this?
This one was up in Northampton, so it was less than a half-hour drive for me.
Oh, so you're laughing.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So this was your first game on day 2, which was your Chaos Knight game. This was the one game of the weekend you did lose.
Yes.
And I just kind of want to just go into this one a bit are, obviously, because looking at things like 8-bound, I would assume Chaos Knights is a pretty easy matchup for you, because you do just run into Armigers and just delete them.
Hmm.
I don't know if maybe it was just the overabundance of shooting, and I know because this was going to bring up the map, because I'm pretty sure you said this was Tide of Conviction, right?
Yes, Tide of Conviction, which is on the opposite end of
There we
Data
go.
Square Salvage. I hate this mission so much
Yeah.
with a passion.
Yeah. So this is obviously the terrain layout that you did use on the day.
Yes.
And the one thing I can notice almost immediately straight away is there is a massive gap down the middle where you basically can't hide,
Yeah.
which I don't imagine is too much of an issue because there are no objectives in the middle. But it does still make your game of I can only really do a damage in melee a bit more of a pain.
Yeah, so his list as well. So it's not something I'm used to seeing with Chaos Knights. So he had gone for House of Extrix, so he had all the rerolls. He gets a free reroll, free hit reroll, and a free wound reroll every time he shoots. And he had a Knight Abominant as his big knight character, Blessing of the Dark Master to make it
The
super
unkillable
tanky.
abominant.
Exactly, yeah. And then he just had War Dogs. I believe off the top of my head, he had 5 Brigands, 2 or 3 Stalkers, and 2 Executioners.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, so it's just five of the chaos shooty ones,
Yep.
three of the half and halves, and then 2 old-fashioned executioners.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just a ridiculous amount of shooting.
Yeah, and he knew exactly what my army was capable of, like the pre-game move, how fast it was, how killy it was, and he deployed his entire army on his right on the edge of his deployment, like as far back as he possibly could.
Yeah.
And I did not want first turn because of this, but unfortunately I got it.
Yeah.
And so even if I ran the 8-bound as far forward as I could and ran them straight into his deployment zone, it was an 8-inch charge, which I really did not want to risk.
No.
Because if I made it, sure, I was killing an Armiger, great.
Then you die.
And then I'm losing 200 points of 8-bound, which it wouldn't be so bad if he was a melee Chaos Knight army, where I could then fight in death and trade something else for the unit.
Yeah.
But the fact that exactly he was all shooting, I would be wasting the unit 1 for 1, which isn't worth it in this scenario.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely the way you look at a lot of your units. They are worth more than you think because they can always kill something and then also trade up in your opponent's turn. And I think that maybe is the weakness of World Eaters. It's a pure shooting list that can hang back long enough to shoot you and then still score well because it is, in a weird way, your secondaries, although they're rewarding you for doing what you want to do, if you don't get the chance to do it, you don't have a fallback. Like, if there is no fighting going on, if your opponent does just play passively, you basically don't really score much. Sure, you score the ones for soaking the objective in blood, for just dying on the objectives you were trying to hold, but if your opponent just takes, like, banners and then 2 other more passive ones, they can probably just outscore you.
So, so in this game, funnily enough, secondaries wasn't my big issue that I had with the game. So the secondaries I took were grind them down because he had all knights. Not grind them down, sorry, bring it down.
Yeah.
So points for everything I kill, melee or shooting, just seemed much better. Pile the skulls because I will always take pile the skulls every single game, no matter what. And I also took banners because soaking the objectives in blood is no good in this mission because it only matters for my units because everything he has is a vehicle.
Oh yeah, I suppose yeah. Didn't think about that.
So I took banners and I think I scored 8 points on this at the end of the game. And one of the biggest swings that happened was in my turn 2. My shooting rolled really well, and the Abominant I managed to bring down to about 15 wounds left through the no rerolls and 5 up feel no pain that it had. Yeah, it was really good. And I had a unit of 8-bound that was staging in the medium L that's to the middle and the left on the objective. I had a unit of 8-bound in their staging. They moved up and they managed to get a charge on both the Abominant and another War Dog. And in my eyes, this is like the perfect scenario. But I didn't trust the 8-bound to kill both, so I wanted to charge another unit of Berserkers in. But unfortunately, even with a 3d6 dropping the lowest charge on an 8-inch and a reroll, I failed it. And it was massive.
Yeah.
If they made it, I probably would have killed the Abominant in turn 2.
Yeah.
But I ended up killing it in turn 3 and losing a unit of 8-bound before I could do it.
Yeah.
which was really rough.
So
Really rough.
if you make that charge, you probably win that game instead. And as you said,
Yeah.
you set it all right, upright. You got the 8-inch 3d6 re-rollable, and sometimes it just doesn't work. There's
Yeah,
not really
like
much you can do about it.
yeah, it's hard to say whether it would have won me the game because obviously the opponent would just play differently. Like
Yeah.
he's no longer got a big guy that he can just run up the board. But because of that happening, it meant he was still on the objective, and he went from scoring 4 victory points on the primary if I'd killed it to 12.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And yeah, the primary really screwed me this game. Having that objective on the right being out in the open with how much shooting he has means I just cannot put a unit on there.
You just can't hold it.
No,
I
at
suppose
all.
you raise a banner on it, and then you kind of just have to accept you're never holding that objective.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it came apparent to me that afterwards I dedicated some berserkers and the exalted 8-bound up the right side of the board. I should never have done this. Because looking at the map, it just doesn't favor me putting melee units up the right side of the board at all. There's nowhere to hide anywhere. What I should have done is focused a hell of a lot more on the left side of the board. Make those early charges, get in his big L blocker, and then use his own deployment as a hiding space. And then I can stage charges out of there, threaten his home objective, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it did not go that way. I massively misplayed.
So what was the, obviously going back to that the team differential? What was the differential in the end for this round?
So this one, I believe, I only scored 4 points, and he scored 16 or 15 and 5. It was one of them.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Was this one of the rounds your team lost, or did you win this?
No, my team actually came in clutch. And,
you're letting them down, Liam. You're letting them down.
I know. They put me on their back, carrying me up to the podiums. Yeah, and they won the round, and so yeah, it was all good. Yeah. They carried me there.
So then, obviously, going into the last round of the weekend, you got the mirror match, didn't you? You were against another world-class player.
Yeah, so I was super excited for this. Like, I saw that there was another World Eaters player in the opponent's team, and I was like, please give me the mirror match. It will be so much fun. Like, there's going to be so much carnage. And I was lucky enough to get it, and it was a really, really good game. By far the most enjoyable one of the weekend.
Yeah, so was his, I'm assuming, obviously, as we said, there's not a great deal of unit diversity in the book anyway. Was he running Angron, or was he running the Lord Invocatus?
He was also running Lord Invocatus. He had Berserkers and Rhinos. He had a couple of units of Jackals as well, just kind of like to act as a screening unit.
Yeah.
He had a unit of 5 and 2 units of 4 8-bound. He had 3 units of 3 exalted 8-bound. So it was all melee. There was absolutely no shooting in this list. And that's what actually gave me the advantage. Having the 2 brigands meant his jackals couldn't really do the job that he wanted them to do.
No, they can't just stand out in the open because you do just pick them up.
Yeah, if I, for argument's sake, I had no shooting. If I couldn't deal with those jackals early on, I would have 100% been absolutely annihilated because a charge into his 8-bound in the first turn is super risky when I have to charge around a screen like the jackals.
Yeah.
But luckily, the brigands really did their job. Just one of them picked up a 10-man unit of jackals, and it meant I could safely charge into some 8-bound and some berserkers.
So the brigands definitely coming in clutch.
Yeah,
and I think this game was your draw, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this one was a draw. I believe the score was like 79 to 78. It was literally 1 point in it.
Yeah, it was a bloody close game.
Yeah, really close. As you can guess by what I was saying earlier, I did go first, which I'm still not sure I wanted. I think overall it was probably an advantage because it meant it meant in the first turn I was killing more units than he was. Because essentially what happened was I pre-game moved a unit of berserkers up and a unit of 8-bound up. I killed one of his screens of the jackals. The berserkers charged a rhino, and the 8-bound got a multi-charge into both a unit of berserkers and a unit of 8-bound. And I fought with the 8-bound first because he's not going to interrupt with a rhino. I spent 2 CP on red butchers, which means the 8-bound unit gets +1 damage on all of their attacks. And I split it so the sweep champion, so sweep is now damage 2, went into the berserkers and just wiped the unit because reasons. And then the rest of the 8-bound went into the other 8-bound.
Yeah.
And I think I actually fluffed the rolls here. I think he still had the champion left alive after it, even though they were flat 3 damage.
It's kind of nuts when it's like, what, 20 odd attacks at flat 3 damage. Like,
yeah, 28 attacks, like, hitting and wounding in 3s. He gets a 5-up save, and each one they go through kills one.
Yeah.
But, he fought on death, which you would do. Wiped my unit back in response.
Yeah.
But it meant that I had already scored 4 points on Blood for the Blood God because I killed a vehicle and 2 units. And he had only scored 1 because he killed my 8-bound. And then it meant my berserkers were still alive going into his turn, and he had no shooting. So my fight on death was massive and could really be used to its full potential, especially when it's backed up by those brigands that are still sitting in my deployment zone.
Yeah.
And it means I can really pick apart his list. Like, my brigands essentially spent the whole game just shooting berserkers. They could shoot 8-bound, but I was like, nope, I want to shoot berserkers.
Yeah, you want to shoot anything that can play on death for a CP. It's going back to what you said with the Chaos Knights, where if somebody has no shooting, obviously what you did with the Sisters as well, we just killed all the shooting units straight away. It basically reduces them to trading down any time they want to take a fight.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I can understand why the brigands are so massive in this matchup.
Yeah. And we were talking about it. We were chatting afterwards, and we agreed that the brigands, when it comes to the mirror match, is what decides it.
Yeah.
He played outstandingly well. Like, he's a very experienced player, especially with melee armies, and and that's what made it such a close game. There were times where the luck spiked on both sides. Like, Lord Invocatus, we each had Lord Invocatus, and they charged each other, and neither of them killed the other, which isn't really something that should happen.
No,
like, the fact that they ignore invuns, hit on 2s, wound on 3s, they should, kill each other.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen, and it shows how strong World Eater's secondaries are when, at the end of the game, I'd essentially tabled him. Like, the only thing he had left was a single Chaos Spawn. And I still had Lord Invocatus, a War Dog Brigand, a Chaos Spawn. I want to say that was mostly it, but it's still 3 objectives that I can hold at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And he still only was down by 1 point compared to me, and it just shows like how strong those secondaries are.
Yeah.
But I can't ever imagine a World Eaters game, like a mirror match, being an absolute stop in one person's favor. It's always going to be a draw or close.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally the fight on death is so, because of how the army works, is so massive for everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think any time you've got 2 armies that are relying on melee and they can fight on death, it's always going to be close because you're never going to be trading up as much as you'd like to.
Exactly.
Cool. So that was all 5 of your games. So you ended up going 3-1-1. And obviously your team overall went 3-2. Which, especially considering this is literally your first time running World Eaters at a big tournament, or not even at a big tournament, running the new Bucketola tournament. I'm assuming you're happy with that. I mean, I would.
Beyond happy. I had such a great time as well. Really good introduction to the team tournament format. My teammates were all such nice people. All my opponents were great. Yeah, I'd 100% go again. In fact, we're actually planning to go.
Yeah.
That's at Toys of Mass Destruction.
You're damn right we are.
Yep.
So if we kind of move on to just some thoughts you sort of had post-tournament. I know there's a lot of people, they love to rant and rave about tier lists for 40k armies. And I know when the World Eaters book came out, everyone went, oh, well, there's only 3 or 4 units. It can only do damage in melee. It's only got 8 stratagems. It's got 1 good warlord trait, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people were quite harsh on World Eaters. And I definitely don't think that has proven to be true. I think they are pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're very good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably put them in like at least A tier.
Yeah, I would put them in A tier with the potential to push up into S depending on the player.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's the fight phase, right? It's the most straightforward and also the most not straightforward phase there is.
Because if you're planning on playing World Eaters in, which you absolutely can, it's a valid strategy where you simply run headlong straight into your opponent and do as much damage as possible. You're going to have a great time. You're going to kill a lot of stuff.
And you're going to score. You're going to score well as well. Don't be wrong. You're not looking at 100 points, but you're still going to score well.
Oh, absolutely. You'll score well, but as soon as you come up against like an experienced player who really knows what they're doing, they're going to be able to counterplay that, have their screening units to really make your charges not worth it.
Yeah.
But when you really start to learn the army, which I'm hoping to do, like I'm really hoping to learn everything that the army can do. I feel like the skill ceiling is very high in all the shenanigans you can do. You got to keep in your head all the tactics you can do in the fight phase, like tri-pointing, just to try and stop people falling back. Trying to mitigate people that want to interrupt by placing models in certain ways, so not every model can fight. And I feel like if you really master the fight phase, they can definitely push up into the S tiers.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, just looking at your army, I don't ever want to face it. So
Yeah. What do you mean? It's a lot of fun.
yeah. So going back to your army, obviously we've had a look at. Put it up again on screen. If we have a look at the army you did take, any glaring changes you are planning to make?
So I was planning on keeping this list until the Forge World update came out, where they would fix all the keywords and we could legally take all the Forge World units in the World Eaters army. And very thankfully, Games Workshop blessed us with the FAQ. I believe it came out yesterday, and I'm immediately making change to the list. So the first thing I'm looking at is dropping a unit of Berserkers, which I don't like because the Berserkers did really well for me over the weekend, but I do need those few extra points to afford some other things. I'm also dropping both Rhinos. Rhinos are great for what they do, but when you have access to Forge World, it becomes a lot more useful with what you can take. Because Rhinos, they have a job, which is put your troops inside, move the tank up, get some blood tithe when it dies, but that's about it. But when you start looking at other transports you can take, like the Dreadclaw drop pod or the Terax drill, who are actually quite good in melee and have pretty good shooting.
Yeah, they're good units regardless of what they can transport.
Yeah. And then when you start to consider when you've got +1 to hit with the blood tithe, suddenly your Dreadclaw or your Terax drill is hitting on 3s in combat. It can have exploding 6s. It still gets the extra attack and strength because you're World Eaters. And the extra points that you're putting into it, it gives you a lot more bang for your buck. Like
I can definitely see that.
a good example is, say I came up against the Chaos Knights, where my Rhinos were kind of just sitting in my deployment zone all game because I knew if I moved them out, they would just immediately die. If I had, say, a Terax drill that pops up, releases its Berserkers, and if it's got +1 to charge, makes a charge into one of those War Dogs, I'm suddenly killing 2 units where I would normally only kill 1.
Yeah.
Because a drill should absolutely mince an armiger in combat.
Yeah. Drill's also toughness 8, right?
Toughness 8, 14 wounds, 3 up save, yeah.
Yeah, so don't be wrong, it's still not difficult to kill, but that toughness 8, especially in that Chaos Knight matchup, your melters and stuff like that, you're getting wounding on 4s instead. It's pretty big.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah.
So yeah, dropping a unit of Berserkers, dropping both the Rhinos for a Dreadclaw drop pod and a Terax drill, I think would really, really benefit the list.
Yeah. So if we've gone through the 5 matchups you did have, and I imagine you probably had some thoughts before the tournament on matchups you would like, matchups you wouldn't like. Are there any things that you would say are we've said obviously good matchups are going into other melee lists, especially maybe not so much other World Eaters because they also have fight on deaths, but anything that relies on doing its damage in melee to trade up. Are there any things you would say are bad matchups?
If you play pure World Eaters with no allies, then they definitely do have their fair share of bad matchups. Stuff like Eldari and Drakari, where they have lots of units that can run around and score points, and it's very hard for you to play tag. It's very hard for you to keep up with them. Harlequins, not so much, because now that their invuln is less, your fight on death can really screw them over, especially when their units are so expensive.
Kill anything they commit, you kill, and then you again fight on death. You're killing them in their turn rather than yours.
Yeah. I would say Chaos Knights were one of our worst matchups until we got the Forge World stuff.
Yeah.
Because it really does give us the little bit extra that we needed. Because as great as our melee is, our anti-toughness 8 is very swingy.
Yeah.
But when we have access to the Teraxtro, who has 5 melty guns, and then the drill that just minces vehicles, and a Dreadclaw drop pod, which unlike a Rhino, you can actually keep safe by putting it in deep strike. It means that they're a lot less of a threat, and you can play into them a lot better rather than
Yeah.
just having to advance up the board.
Yeah, I can definitely see it.
I do think Imperial Knights will be our biggest struggle. Specifically, the list that people build with I think it's called Strike and Shield.
Yeah, Strike and Shroud.
Strike and Shroud. So where they have trans hit to hit in combat. They can spend upgrades for transhuman, and then they can have a 4-up invuln on top of that.
Yeah.
World Eaters are not breaking through that.
Yeah,
Like,
you're failing to kill even Armigers at that point. Like
yeah,
you're running into them and just not killing what you need to kill, and
yeah,
then obviously they can then rely back on their shooting to then clear you
mhm,
off when you can't fight on them.
yeah. Especially when also that Armiger is going to have -1 damage. So I even worked out a 5-man 8-bound unit with +1 damage and +1 to hit. If you're hitting an Armiger with all those buffs, still doesn't kill it,
That's
which is outrageous when there's only a 12.5% chance for any of your attacks to actually do anything, and
yeah,
it's at -1 damage on top of that. It's like,
yeah.
it's absurd.
It's definitely also one of those times when you're finding that you're having no rerolls. It's going to be huge. As soon as
Yeah,
your opponent can go right, discard half your dice, you're going to struggle.
yeah, absolutely. It is also why I was scared of Custodes with their ability to turn off rerolls, transhuman, and everything like that. But then Custodes, again, they're one of those armies where they live or die by the 4-ups. So all it takes is for them to roll a couple more fails. They don't really have any damage reduction, so that 8-bound do just like mince through a big unit of wardens.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, but I would say Imperial Knights and sometimes Chaos Knights are definitely our worst matchup.
Yeah. Right.
To be
Well,
seen. I'm
yeah,
still learning the
yeah.
codex. There's probably going to be matchups that I'll go into expecting it to be fine, and then I get absolutely destroyed, and then I realize that it's a terrible matchup
Yeah.
for us.
I mean,
So I'm
you
keen to learn
didn't
what
play
they
any horde armies. I'd be curious to see how you would go into a horde army. Something like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe orcs. I know there's a lot of orc lists nowadays that are just a million toughness 5 bodies. That all don't have a great
Orcs.
save. There's just a million of them.
Yeah, Orcs is definitely something that I'm keen to see how it goes, um, because as good as Berserkers are with the amount of attacks they get, a 5-man unit of Berserkers is not going to kill 30 Orc boys. Like, not even close. But again, it's one of those things where fight on death is really going to come into play. So I'm really curious to see how they would do into an Orc horde
Yeah.
list. So we shall find out.
Sure. So no, I think we've pretty much covered everything. We've covered kind of world eaters in general. We've covered your experience with them, what your kind of thoughts and stuff are. Have you got any I don't know, any closing thoughts or anything? I mean, I think I've asked everything I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I've talked about pretty much everything I wanted to say. I just want to say that the army is so much fun, like, and
Yeah.
with how condensed the book is, like, there's not like a million rules you need to remember. There's only 8 stratagems, 3 warlord traits, 3 relics. It's such an easy book to get into. That even if it's like your first army, it's very easy to understand. It's very straightforward, and I mean the models are so cool as
Yeah.
well. So,
Yeah. And I think
yeah,
it's again what we said at the beginning, where sure you've only got those 8 strats, you've got 3 warlord traits, you've got 3
mhm,
relics, whatever, but everything has a place. You would use everything. There is nothing in the book that you look
yes.
at and go, "This is garbage. I'll never use."
I mean the Defiler exists, but
Okay, I mean, yes, some of the some of the demon engines, but
yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. Like all of the new stuff, especially,
yeah,
all of it has a place. The Humble Chaos Spawn, probably the MVP of the book. But yeah, I'm super excited, super hyped to play
yeah,
the army. I'm hoping to play it for most of the next ITC year.
yeah,
Want
yeah. I
to
mean,
get as high rank as
I'm sure when we do some future tournament reports, you'll probably be talking about world eaters again, and we'll see kind of how they shake up as I don't know, either 10th comes out or the end of ninth, that kind of stuff.
possible. Yeah, we shall see.
But I think that's all good. I know. Are you at a tournament this weekend? I'm not.
Yes, I'm at a small RTT this
Cool.
weekend where again I'm using World Eaters.
So
Um,
we might have some more world eaters related content.
yeah,
Otherwise it'll be more generic stuff. See how it kind of goes. But thank you everybody for tuning in.
yes,
As I
thank you.
said, this was the first episode. Hoping to do sort of a weekly release, either based on sort of what we've been doing, what's been coming out that week. Liam, you got any final closing thoughts?
Nah, I mean, as I said, there'll be lots more to talk about of World Eaters.
Yep.
And like you've said, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in, listened to us. We really do appreciate it. And we hope to bring you more content that you guys will enjoy soon.
Yep. So thanks very much everyone for tuning in, and we will see you in a bit.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
See ya.